The Commission will come to order, and good morning to all of you. In the early 1990s, the Chinese government and the Communist Party welcomed the contributions of the Falun Gong spiritual movement. Its Qigong exercises and meditation had health benefits. Its core teachings of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance promoted morality in a society increasingly aware of a spiritual vacuum. All that changed, however, in 1999, when several thousand Falun Gong practitioners peaceably assembled at Zhongnanhe Leadership Compound in Beijing. China's leaders were astonished that Falun Gong had grown so large and prominent outside of the party control, so large that Falun Gong practitioners might outnumber the Communist Party's 60 million members. Immediately afterwards, the Chinese government and Communist Party began the campaign of persecution against Falun Gong that now has lasted for more than 13 years. The persecution has been amply documented by the Department of State, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Freedom House, and many other human rights non-governmental organizations. The campaign has been severe, brutal, ugly, and vicious. Many tens of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners have been detained and arrested. No one can count those sent to prison for long terms, and too many remain there. More were sentenced to re-education camps through labor. Others just disappeared. Those released have told of long and brutal interrogations, beatings, and sleep deprivation, and other forms of torture. Their captors demanded statements and confessions. They demanded that those in custody name other practitioners better to roll up the movement. Rights movements have documented more than 3,000 deaths of practitioners from torture and mistreatment. And doubtless there have been many more who have died in custody, their stories yet untold. Parallel to the treatment of practitioners was a comprehensive propaganda campaign designed to demonize the movement. From their radios and televisions, Chinese learned Falun Gong was a heretical cult organization. The schools taught the same dictated talking points to the young and the impressionable. On September 12th, Dana Rohrabacher of California and I co-chaired a joint hearing of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittees on Oversight and Investigations and my committee, the Africa Global Health and Human Rights Committee. We heard horrific testimony on the issue of organ harvesting in China. The witnesses touched on many issues: transplants in Chinese medicine, transplant tourism, organ donors, reliance on death row prisoners, and disturbing testimony that Falun Gong practitioners and other prisoners of conscience may have been involuntary victims. For those interested in reviewing the evidence in full, I would recommend the transcript of that hearing. One of our witnesses today, however, will review this issue. In addition to arrests of practitioners, imprisonment, and sentences to re-education through labor, and deaths, the Chinese government and Communist Party have pressured Falun Gong practitioners to renounce their belief and practice. This, quote, transformation campaign has been documented by our commission in its annual reports and by other human rights organizations. Amnesty International described the campaign as a, quote, process through which individuals were pressured, often through mental and physical torture, to renounce their belief. An extra-legal party-run security apparatus created in June of 1999 to eliminate the Falun Gong movement. The 610 offices spearheaded the campaign. The CECC observed this past year on our official websites, providing education and training materials for local officials who continue to support their effort to suppress the Falun Gong. The Chinese government and Communist Party have also continued to harass and detain persons who attempted to assist Falun Gong practitioners, including human rights lawyers such as Wei Liangyou, Wang Yanghang, and Gao Zhejiang. In the campaign against the Falun Gong, we see in high relief so many features of governance in China. The Chinese people's hopes are the ordinary hopes of mankind: to be free to work, to speak, to pray, to move, to enjoy healthy lives, to be free of poisonous pollution, to organize for better workplaces and better pay, and to find justice. What do they get? It's repression, unchecked police powers, prisons and labor camps, arbitrary courts, pressure against defense attorneys, punishment of family members as well as individuals, control of the media, blindness to the human costs of the party's policies, indifference to life, and demonization of those who dare to disagree or speak out. We see this in the repression of believers, be they Tibetan Buddhists, members of house churches, or Falun Gong practitioners. We see this in the rough and brutal resort to forced abortions and involuntary sterilization of Chinese women who dare to hope that they could enjoy the same rights as the world's other women to decide their own how many children they will have. In this year's 2012 annual report, the Commission urged the Chinese government to permit Falun Gong practitioners to freely practice inside of China, to freely allow Chinese lawyers to represent citizens who challenge the legality of laws, regulations, rulings, or actions by officials, police, and prosecutors, and courts that relate to religion, to eliminate criminal and administrative penalties that target religions and spiritual movements and have been used to punish Chinese citizens for exercising their right to freedom of religion. In the annual report, the Commission also called for the elimination of certain articles of law. Article 300 of the PRC criminal law criminalizes using a, quote, cult to undermine implementation of state laws. Article 27 of the PRC Public Security Administrative Punishment Law stipulates detention or fines for organizing or inciting others to engage in cult activities and for using cults or the guise of religion to disturb social order or to harm others' health. Today, we repeat those recommendations. The purpose of this hearing is to allow our panel of experts on China and Falun Gong to review the persecution of the Falun Gong by the Chinese government and the Communist Party, and to update members of this commission and the general public on recent developments. Again, I look forward to our witnesses, thank them in advance for being here, and yield to my good friend and colleague, the co-chairman of our commission, Sherry Brown.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. It's been a pleasure working with Chris Smith during this Congress. I so appreciate his leadership on this issue. I want to thank the staff of the commission, Lawrence Liu and Paul Protik, especially the two staff directors, and all of you who helped to put together the annual report that came out of these hearings and the work that you all do for human rights. This is our last hearing for the 112th Congress. This commission and others have well documented the abuses committed by the Chinese government and Communist Party against practitioners of Falun Gong. I would add to that my thanks for the work on the annual report and in this hearing and other hearings, the work of my staff, person on my staff, Doug Babcock, and the good work he has done on this. In this annual report, we describe the 13-year campaign that Chairman Smith just discussed against Falun Gong as extensive, systematic, and in some cases violent. It's indeed one of the harshest campaigns against a group of believers in modern times. Countless practitioners of Falun Gong face arbitrary detention and torture and psychiatric abuse, and in some cases death, simply for practicing their beliefs. Unfortunately, the Communist Party apparently believes that the only way it is to survive is to stamp out diversity of opinion and belief wherever it occurs. For Falun Gong practitioners, this means renouncing your beliefs and being transformed. They use the word transformed through re-education. Those who seek to defend Falun Gong practitioners are harassed and detained. All of us are aware of these abuses because of the many Falun Gong practitioners, a number of them in my state of Ohio, who possess the courage to speak out. That's why we're lucky today to have Bruce Chung with us. Bruce flew all the way from Taiwan on short notice to be here today. He traveled here with his brother because he believes, as I believe, that the truth must be told. This summer, and Bruce will discuss this obviously in more detail as our first witness, this summer Bruce was visiting relatives in the People's Republic of China when authorities there detained him. They held him for 54 days. He was monitored around the clock while in custody. He was subjected to long hours of questioning without access to a lawyer. His interrogators sought to force him to sign a confession. For what? Authorities claim he threatened national security by trying to broadcast Falun Gong materials in China. But his real crime was trying to overcome China's censorship and exercise his right, a human right to free expression. I thank Bruce and other witnesses for being here today. I know it's a difficult decision to decide to speak out and tell your story, especially when the facts can be painful and sensitive. But know, too, that you're doing something extremely important, for you're speaking up for the countless others who could not be here today and letting the world know what is happening inside of China. In the United States, we believe that our strength as a nation comes from the diversity of our people. China cannot keep responding to diversity as a threat to be suppressed. This is not an effective strategy. It's not working on the Tibetan Plateau, where a policy of repression has led to a series of terrible tragedies. Nearly 100 Tibetans have committed self-immolation in protest of policies against their religion and against their culture. It's not working on the internet, where hundreds of millions of Chinese thirst for a place where they can share uncensored and diverse views about their society and their government. It's not working against the Uyghur people either. This strategy won't work in the case of Falun Gong, whose practitioners simply want to live in peace and freedom. In the United States, we fight for the right of our citizens to practice their belief. China seems too often to fight against those practices of its people. China must end all repression of Falun Gong practitioners, guarantee their freedom of belief and expression and assembly, and release all political prisoners. Threats to freedom only strengthen people's resolve. People like Bruce Chung, it makes them fight harder for what's right. The sooner China realizes this, the better off their people and this world will be. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, thank you very much for your excellent statement. I'd like to now welcome to the witness table our first panel, beginning with Bruce Chung, who is a technology company manager in Taiwan and Falun Gong practitioner. He was arrested in June of this year after he visited relatives in China. He was detained and interrogated for endangering state security and held for 54 days, even though he was not indicted on any charges. His cause was taken up by family, Amnesty International, and many civil organizations in Taiwan. We'll then hear from Mr. Zhiming, who was serving as an Air Force officer in Beijing when he began practicing Falun Gong. After the Chinese Communist Party began the persecution of Falun Gong in 1999, Mr. Hu joined many peaceful appeals calling for religious freedom. Bypassing China's controls on the internet, he downloaded information on the persecution from the internet. For these activities, he was imprisoned twice for a number of years. He was accepted by the United States as a refugee in August of this year. We'll then hear from Sarah Cook. We welcome her back, a senior research analyst for Freedom on the Net and East Asia at Freedom House. She is a member of the China Media Bulletin Weekly News Digest. Before she joined Freedom House, she co-edited the English translation of A China More Just, a memoir by prominent rights attorney Gao Zhejiang. And then we'll finally hear in this first panel from Gian Zhao, Dr. Xu, who is currently assistant professor of medicine at Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York. He received his MD from Hengyang Medical School in China and his PhD from Yale University, where he also completed his postdoctorate research and was trained as a kidney specialist. And we will also thank Helen Gao, who is our interpreter for today.
I want to thank Chairman Smith and Co-Chairman Brown for holding this important hearing and inviting me to testify today. My name is Zhongding Bang, manager of Intech Technology Company Limited in Taiwan. Like hundreds of thousands of Taiwanese citizens, I practice Falun Gong. I traveled to Guangzhou City in China's Jiangxi province to visit some family members on June 15 this year. During the several days of visit, I didn't do any Falun Gong activities or contact any Falun Gong practitioners in mainland China. On June 18, I was on my way back to Taiwan as planned. When I was just about to board the flight from Guangzhou to Shenzhen, I was forcefully taken away by state security agents. I was then detained for 54 days under the vague accusation of sabotaging national security and public safety until my release on August 11. I protested with a hunger strike. It wasn't until the second day of my unlawful detention that I was allowed to see my family and make one supervised call to my home in Taiwan. It wasn't until the next month that I was able to see my attorney, Guo Lianhui, but they only let us meet once and not in private. without the presence of my attorney. I was subjected to marathon interrogation sessions that drove me to deep fatigue. The main content of the interrogations was all about my activities in Taiwan, of which they seemed to know a great deal, suggesting that I had been monitored in Taiwan for some time. The points the interrogation concentrated on were as follows. 1. An incident in 2003 in which I mailed TV hijacking equipment to Falun Gong practitioners in mainland China. 2. I had once asked a mainland China Falun Gong practitioner to provide me with government documents regarding the persecution of Falun Gong. 3. I tried to broadcast truth films regarding persecution of Falun Gong via satellite signals in Taiwan. 4. They wanted to know all the methods that Taiwan Falun Gong practitioners use to expose the persecution of Falun Gong in mainland China. 5. They tried to force me to provide all names, phone numbers, email address, and participating projects of Falun Gong practitioners in Taiwan. Throughout the interrogations, they threatened me that if I did not cooperate, they were bringing in a harsher team to handle me, that they would change my civil detention to a criminal detention, and that they would send me to judicial authorities to be sentenced to prison. What is most unacceptable to me was that the state security agents forced me to sign a confession statement and asked me to admit that I committed a crime to endanger national security, public safety, and sabotage public property. 3 weeks before I went back to Taiwan, they began to threaten me to admit my guilt and remorse. I was forced to write and rewrite many times the statement, and I was videotaped again and again. I was threatened not to be too outspoken after I got to Taiwan. Undeterred, I called for a press conference on the third day after I landed in Taiwan, openly stating that, 1, what I wrote in that so-called confession statement and all the interrogations records were not done with my free will. All the details I provided were made up by me to deal with their threats. 2, I will continue to spread the truth to the Chinese public until the day the persecution ends. 3, as an individual living in free and democratic Taiwan, it is an appropriate and just action for me to help the Chinese public who have been deceived and persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party. Not until I returned to Taiwan did I realize that the people of Taiwan had put in tremendous efforts to rescue me. About 200,000 people in Taiwan signed a letter campaign that urged President Ma Ying-jeou to strive to gain my release. Over 30 NGOs came together to organize activities, and on these 3 occasions accompanied my family during their petitions at the office of the president. Additionally, I wish to make 2 points clear. First, the Chinese Communists does not only persecute Falun Gong practitioners in China. According to the Taiwan Falun Gong Association, I am the 17th Taiwanese Falun Gong practitioner subject to persecution from Chinese Communist Party. Second, the Chinese Communist Party has hired spies overseas to illegally collect Falun Gong practitioners' personal information and information of their activities. Finally, I would like to thank members of U.S. Congress and European Parliament for their efforts to secure my release. Thank you.
Chung, thank you so very much. And like Chairman Brown, we're very grateful that you made the trip here to be here to convey this very, very powerful testimony to us. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Hu.
First, I First, I wish to express a heartfelt thank you to Chairman Smith and Co-Chairman Brown for holding this important hearing. I came to the U.S. as a refugee in August this year. I witnessed the popularity of Falun Gong before 1999. I saw the horrors of the persecution between 1999 and 2010. I also have seen how the peaceful and valiant grassroots efforts of so many in China are turning back tyranny. I will start at the beginning. My brother told me about Falun Gong in 1997. I loved it right away. My nasal problem that bothered me all of my life was gone after practicing Falun Gong for 2 weeks. The teaching also made me full of joy and peace. Falun Gong gave me a renewed outlook on life and on human society. In 1997, I was an officer in the Air Force. I lived and worked on a base in Beijing. We had an exercise practice site at the Air Force Command University. I went almost every morning along with 40 or 50 other Air Force officers or professors. We helped each other be more ethical in our behavior, more responsible in our work, and more noble in our actions. I cherish these memories immensely. But on July 20, 1999, former communist leader Jiang Zemin started a violent campaign to eradicate Falun Gong. The situation around the entire country was extremely tense. At first, we were confused, but then I began to use a proxy server to read reports on Minghui.org, the main Falun Gong website. I read how many practitioners were being tortured and killed. I had to act. By early 2000, many of us had a proactive attitude. We wanted to help, so I decided to leave the Air Force compound so I have more time and freedom. Within a week, however, the Air Force found me. They detained me for more than 2 months, but they couldn't transfer me. Instead, they forced me to retire from military and took me back to my hometown in Liaoning province in May 2000. I returned to Beijing to continue the work of peacefully exposing the persecution. We made a plan to travel the country and train practitioners to gather around the internet blockade and share information on the Minghui website. We were successful in 7 major cities, but in Shanghai in October 2000, police raided my hotel room and arrested me. They put me in a detention center and prison for 4 years. I could easily have died from mistreatment there. I was released in October 2004, but in 2005, a plainclothes policeman saw me give a copy of the non-commentary DVD to someone on the street in Beijing. They put me through a show trial and sent me to 4 more years of prison. For more than 3 of these years, I was very close to dying. Hunger strikes, force feedings, and injections of poisonous chemicals made me an immobile and skeletal whisper of a man. During this time, they often conducted blood testing and comprehensive physical exams, but they never gave me treatment that helped me get better. When I later learned of organ harvesting, I can't help but wonder if I might have been a candidate. When I was released in 2009, doctors told my family that I would probably die. If I didn't, I would be disabled. At home, I resumed my Falun Gong practice and was able to walk in 2 months. Soon, I could take long walks outside. My experience of recovery is similar to how Falun Gong is still being practiced in China. The prisons failed to transform me, and the Communist Party has failed to wipe out Falun Gong. In 2000, I saw no signs of Falun Gong practitioner activity in my hometown, but when I left China in 2010, I saw many Falun Gong posters hung in public for a long time. More and more people see through the once widespread lies and refuse to be accomplices of this persecution. Because of hearings like this, along with the awareness and pressure it puts on the communist regime, I believe this persecution will end soon. Please do all that you can to help the persecution end more quickly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Ms. Cook.
Good morning, Chairman Smith and Co-Chairman Brown, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for convening this hearing. I've been asked to address the origins of the campaign that led to the arrest of these two men on my right. Today, Chinese citizens, as we just heard now, who practice Falun Gong live under constant threat of abduction and torture. The name of the practice and various homonyms are among the most censored terms on the Chinese internet. Any mention by Chinese diplomats is inevitably couched in demonizing labels. But this was not always the case. Throughout the early and mid-1990s, Falun Gong, its practitioners, and its founder, Mr. Li Hongzhi, were often the subject of awards, positive media coverage, and government support. In an occurrence almost unimaginable today, Mr. Li gave a series of lectures at the Chinese embassy in Paris in 1995. Chinese from every strata of society, doctors, farmers, workers, soldiers, some Communist Party members, began taking up the practice. Students of Falun Gong would gather in groups to perform its meditative exercises, but many saw the discipline as a personal rather than collective endeavor to enhance their health, mental well-being, and spiritual wisdom. There were no signs of a political agenda or even the kind of criticism of the Communist Party that appeared in Falun Gong literature after the persecution began. By 1999, according to government sources, Western media reports, and Falun Gong witnesses, tens of millions of people were practicing. So what went wrong? The answer lies in a combination of ideological fears, institutional factors, and an individual leader's fateful decision. As you all know, Falun Gong is a spiritual practice. Its key features are Qigong exercises and teachings reminiscent of Buddhist and Taoist traditions that have been part of Chinese culture for thousands of years. But for decades, the CCP has displayed a low tolerance for groups or individuals who place any authority above their allegiance to the party. For Tibetans, this is the Dalai Lama. For Falun Gong practitioners, it is spiritual teaching centered on the values of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Now, Falun Gong's emphasis on these particular three values as part of its theistic worldview appears to have especially attracted the party's ire. The concept seemed to conflict with Marxism and other ideas that have been a source of legitimacy for the party's authoritarian rule, like materialism, political struggle, and xenophobic nationalism. In fact, Xinhua, the state-run news agency, hinted at this at one of its articles in 1999 after the ban. In fact, quote, "In fact, the so-called truth, kindness, and tolerance principle preached by Li Hongzhi has nothing in common with the socialist ethical and cultural progress we are striving to achieve." The Communist Party also feels threatened by independent civil society entities. In 1996, the state-run Qigong Association instructed the establishment of party branches among Falun Gong followers and wished to profit from the practice. So Li Hongzhi parted ways with it. Falun Gong's spiritual independence was then coupled with a loosely knit organizational network. From 1996 to 1999, many in the government and the party held favorable views of Falun Gong and publicly cited its benefits for health and even social stability. But as Falun Gong's popularity and independence from party control grew, several top cadres began viewing it as a threat. This translated into repression that showed its first signs in 1996, not 1999. The publication of Falun Gong books by state printing presses was banned shortly after these were listed as bestsellers. Sporadic articles smearing Falun Gong appeared in state-run news outlets. Security agents began monitoring practitioners and occasionally dispersing meditation sessions. It was in this context that in April 1999, the escalated harassment culminated in several dozen practitioners being beaten and arrested in Tianjin. Those calling for their release were told that the orders had come from Beijing. On April 25th, over 10,000 adherents gathered quietly outside the National Petitions Office in Beijing, adjacent to the Zhongnanhai government compound. They asked for an end to abuses and recognition of their practice. Some observers have pointed to this incident as taking party leaders by surprise and triggering the suppression that followed. But such an interpretation is flawed when one considers that it was escalating harassment led by central officials, including then Security Tsar Luo Gan, that sparked the appeal in the first place. Rather, the event was pivotal because of how individual leaders responded to it. Premier Zhu Rongji adopted an appeasing stance and met with several of the petitioners' representatives. The practitioners in Tianjin were released and those in Beijing went home. But Party Secretary Jiang Zemin overruled Zhu. He called Falun Gong a serious challenge to the regime's authority, in fact, one of the most serious challenges since the founding of the People's Republic. In a circular dated June 7th, he issued his fateful order to disintegrate Falun Gong. Indeed, several experts have attributed the campaign in part to Jiang's personal jealousy. He reportedly disliked the sincere enthusiasm Falun Gong inspired, while his own standing in the eyes of the Chinese public was weak. But whatever the specific event of the late 1990s, the repression of Falun Gong in China cannot be viewed in a vacuum. Rather, it is one episode within the Communist Party's long history of arbitrarily suppressing independent thought and launching political campaigns against perceived enemies. The party's tactics have become more subtle and sophisticated over time, but the underlying dynamics remain the same. The decision of what is approved or forbidden is made arbitrarily by party leaders, and the institutions like an independent judiciary that might curb their excesses are kept within the party's realm of influence. We see this with daily censorship directives, and it's the same when it comes to spiritual movements like Falun Gong. Once Jiang made his decision, there was little to stop what came next. In July 1999, a full-scale campaign reminiscent of the Cultural Revolution was launched. The full weight of the CCP's repressive apparatus was turned on Falun Gong. The Communist Party and Chinese officials typically assert that Falun Gong needed to be banned because it was, quote, an evil cult that was having a nefarious influence on society. But these claims have not held up to scrutiny when investigated in China, nor when one considers Falun Gong spread in other parts of the world, including democratic Taiwan. In fact, it was only several months after Jiang had already initiated the campaign that the party apparatus zeroed in on this very effective term for its propaganda purposes, a manipulated English translation of the Chinese term xie jiao. Jiao Ming, a former Falun Gong prisoner of conscience, summed up the dynamics as follows. The party's machinery of persecution was there. Jiang pushed the button. Thank you very much. In my written testimony, you will find comments on some of the long-term consequences this campaign has had, both for Falun Gong and for rule of law in China. Thank you very much.
Ms. Cook, thank you very much. Now, Dr. Xu.
Good morning. Honorable Chairman Christopher Smith, Co-Chairman Ms. Brown, members of Congress and distinguished panelists. My name is Jian Chao Xu. As a kidney specialist, I'm also a attending staff physician at James J. Peters Veteran Administration Hospital in New York. I'm also adjunct assistant professor in medicine at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. In addition, I serve as medical director for the nonprofit organization Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, DAFOR, which is comprised of medical professionals from around the world who investigate the practice of illegal organ transplantation. We are particularly concerned about the reports of organ harvesting from Falun Gong practitioners in China, who we believe have been victimized on a very large scale. The medical community has known about unethical organ transplantation in China since the 1990s. At a congressional hearing in 2001, firsthand and direct evidence of unethical organ transplant practice in China surfaced. Dr. Wang Guoqi, a Chinese medical doctor, testified to the House Representatives Subcommittee on Human Rights. Dr. Wang testified that prisoners receive blood tests in prison to determine their compatibility with interested donors. On execution day, he said, the prisoners who were to become organ donors were the first to die. That was over a decade ago. Since then, things have gotten worse, much worse. There are vast more transplants in China today than those are identifiable source of organs. The government of China has openly admitted to using the organs of executed prisoners. But even if we were to assume that every single execution results in organ transplant, there is still not enough to account for the vast discrepancy between organ donations and transplant operations. Falun Gong practitioners are the most likely source of many of the organs used in the transplant procedures in China over the past decade. There was enormous increase in transplants after 1999, with no reported changes in organ donation process. The one thing that did occur in 1999 was the beginning of the persecution of Falun Gong, which now stands as the only viable explanation for the 41,500 official transplants from 2000 to 2005 with unexplained donors. Even if we use the China Deputy Minister Wang Jihui's own data, there were approximately 30,500 unexplained sources of organs from 1997 to 2007. Mr. Ethan Gottman, a young fellow of Foundation for Defense of Democracy's painstakingly interviewed victims who were imprisoned in China, as detailed in his chapter in the book, State Organs. His estimate is that 65,000 Falun Gong practitioners have been killed for their organs. We have every reason to believe that organ harvesting is ongoing in China to this day. According to a report from NTT DTV, a patient this year traveled from Taiwan to mainland China, changing First Central Hospital, and received concurrent liver and kidney transplantations. It only took 1 month to find matching liver and kidneys, where he has waited for years in Taiwan. Organ harvesting is an ongoing problem, and it remains widespread. Fortunately, the movement to stop this gruesome practice is gaining momentum. The Taiwan government is now requiring citizens to provide details of the transplant center surgeons and donors if they go abroad to have organ transplant, and subsequently seek health insurance coverage for their post-operative treatments. Starting in May 2011, instructions to authors submitted to the American Journal of Transplantation states that publication will not accept manuscripts whose data derived from transplants involving organs obtained from executed prisoners. In the January 2012 issues of Journal of Clinical Investigation, an editorial stated, the practice of transplanting organs from executed prisoners in China appears to be widespread. We vigorously condemn this practice and effective immediately will not consider manuscripts on human organ transplantation for publications, so on and so forth. As you can see, there has been progress, but more needs to be done. Membership of International Professional Society by Chinese transplant professionals must be conditioned by acceptance that no organs will be used for executed prisoners. Pharmaceutical companies must ensure that no executed prisoners are the source of organs used in their studies. I urge the United States government and anyone with any knowledge of organ harvesting to publicly release all evidence they have with regard to China's use of prisoners as source for organ donation. Those are the steps we can take. Some of them are underway. Let us strive further and even faster. I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the CECC for holding this hearing, and especially to the Honorable Chairman Christopher Smith. You have been a true champion in advocating for Falun Gong and human rights. Particularly, I applaud your recent effort, the Dear Colleague letter expressing concerns about China's forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience, particularly from Falun Gong detainees, and asking Department of State to share any information they have received about ethical organ harvesting in China, including anything that Wang Nijun, a Chinese police chief who met with the consular officials in China, might have divulged to US consular officials. Wang is believed to have been intimately involved in organ harvesting. He has received an award for innovation in organ harvesting by the government. And also as a police chief, he directly oversaw the persecution of Falun Gong with his jurisdiction, which included a hospital. Thus, Mr. Wang's information may hold the key to unlock the mystery of organ harvesting in China. Revealing his information may put an end to the horrific crime against humanity. I thank you.
Dr. Shu, thank you very much for your testimony. And without objection, all of your full statements we made a part of the record because they are very detailed and very chilling in the information they convey to this commission. Dr. Shu, if I could just ask you first, I would note parenthetically that I held a hearing back in the mid-1990s on organ harvesting. Harry Wu, the great survivor of the Lao Gai, actually helped smuggle out a man who was a guard who gave expert testimony and eventually got asylum because he obviously could not go back, about executed prisoners. He showed how they would execute the prisoners, take their organs, that the pain and the suffering often accompanying that because anesthesia was not given to this prisoner or the prisoners. And you in your testimony talk about how much worse this has gotten, and the numbers that you have in your testimony is absolutely numbing. You point out, for example, that Ethan Gutman has estimated that 65,000 Falun Gong practitioners have been killed for their organs. I remember reading a book some years ago about the Japanese Unit 731, which did horrific experimentation on especially Chinese, but also on others who he was the Joseph Mengele, the people that of the Nazis, but in this case for the Japanese, a horrifying war crime and crimes against humanity, and yet this is being replicated today. As you pointed out, Dr. Wang was so upset, tormented is the word you used, after he followed orders to remove the skin of a still living prisoner in October of 1995. The incident prompted him to alert the international community to the inhuman practice of organ harvesting in China. And as you and others have pointed out, it has only gone from bad to worse. So I thank you and I thank all of you for bringing one abuse after another that is imposed upon the Falun Gong to the attention of this commission. But this practice and the widespread nature of it, it begs correction, and actually we need to do far more than we have done to combat it. So my question to you is, are we doing enough? The United States, the President, the Congress, how is the United Nations doing on this? I mean, we have a Human Rights Council that's supposed to be taking up these issues, and it seems to me that very often, if it's not Israel that's in the crosshairs, very little is done human rights-wise by the Human Rights Council. So if you could speak to that as well. And you also point out, Dr. Shu, about the monitoring at a country level when someone goes and gets an organ transplant, that there needs to be a filing as to who was the provider of that organ, you know, under what circumstances. Because when they do come back, as we all know, they're going to need anti-rejection drugs like Celcept and other things that are very expensive, but they work. But for all of that aftercare, if the organ has been procured in a totally inhumane way, we need to know it, and people need to be held accountable. So if you could speak to what we could do legislatively as well, and others who would like to join in on that question.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. The first question I want to I think we need more. And just to give you an example, Israel, thanks to Dr. Review, and the Israel government has implemented legislative changes that they will not cover patients for the medical care if they get the organ from tourists and from overseas. And in our country, I think what we can do is institute similar legislative changes to expose the truth, what is going on in China, to expose what organ trafficking is involved, to expose the live organ harvesting especially, is going on in China. If our citizens know that if you go to China to receive an organ, meaning that another person has to die, I think our citizens will stop going there. And so the citizens around the world will do the same. And we can also, at the government level, we can implement legislative changes, such as we can have a witness protection program, so the doctors, who I believe is the most powerful witness to stand in front of you to testify against the crime against humanity. If we don't offer such protection, I think it's very difficult to have a doctor who comes forth and who is involved in this crime to testify. And other things, like we could, at government level, as I mentioned, we can have, for example, as you mentioned, when patients get organ transplantation overseas, often operation is a budget operation, is less to our standard. And when they come back home, like Dr. Gabriel Danovich, my dear colleague, he's expert in transplantation, we see patients who has higher complications and whose mortality morbidity are much higher than our standard. And we spend more money and impose a bigger economic burden to our country to take care of these patients post-operatively. And I think that's what I can answer your question.
Could you tell us what kind of profit is derived per organ? Who gets it? And what are the countries where the recipients are coming from? Is it United States, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan? You know, is there any kind of breakdown? Do we have any detailed information concerning who they are?
I cannot give you the exact number, precise number offhand, but what I can tell you, like Taiwan has recipients in the order of hundreds and thousands. And Saudi Arabia, the rich countries, rich states, if they can afford to this kind of organ tourism, they are large portion of this recipients. And it's certainly United States, but because anecdotally, my colleagues have seen patients returning home, getting organ from China who receive post-operative care. And in terms of the price for each organ, I think it's in the order of 60,000, for example, for kidney. For heart, it's over 100,000. For liver, it's in the order of 80,000 to over 100,000. The precise number is used to advertise in Chinese hospitals' website. And this number I can provide to you, two precise numbers, but it appears to be in that range.
You know, in a parallel way, I never visited it, but I did look at it on the web when it was in this area. The bodies exhibition, what struck me was how unbelievably healthy the people look who have been. There's some East German doctor or some doctor that perfected this method of preserving those people. There have been suggestions that they are Falun Gong and that they are incredibly healthy, they're prisoners, and then they are killed for these exhibitions. It's not the same as organ harvesting, obviously, but it's the same macabre genre. Do you know anything about that?
I focused my study on the organ harvesting, but I also was told such body preservation, young people was killed, and they are from Falun Gong practitioners. I understand because when Falun Gong practitioners returned, some of them are afraid of their family, friends are being related and persecuted if they disclose their name. So some of them don't even tell the police their name. So those people is subject to a vulnerable, very vulnerable group of prisoners. I will not be surprised. In fact, there are some evidence to suggest that those bodies come from Falun Gong practitioners.
Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Dr. Xu, I want one more question on that, then I want to ask Mr. Chung some questions and others. You had mentioned membership in international organizations and pharmaceutical companies. What do you suggest we do? How can we help, and how can those two groups, membership in international physician organizations, and allowing Chinese or not allowing Chinese physicians into those organizations, and the role of pharmaceutical companies. There are a number of U.S. companies that do a lot of production of pharmaceuticals in China. I know that's not related to this, but there is certainly a connection between our countries and the pharmaceutical industry that way. Do you have thoughts on the whole, how we can perhaps in terms of help to answer some of the issues that Chairman Smith brought up about how to stop this practice by working with international organizations and international physician organizations and with the drug companies?
We are not opposing the pharmaceutical company to set up their shops to manufacture their goods to serve the patients. However, I think if they do a trial, a clinical trial to develop a new drugs, and if they use the organs which are from executed prisoners, from living prisoners, Falun Gong practitioners, we as the international community should condemn and should oppose such practice. If they manufacture a drug, let's say new oral or whatever anti-injection medicine for the use for FDA-approved use, I think that's standard practice. We have no objection to that. In terms of what the international community, medical community can do to stop, to end this horrific crime, one thing we proposed is to have the membership to ask the training centers, the hospitals, to stop taking trainees from China who will not sign the affidavit that they will not participate in organ transplantation involving executed prisoners. And I think that's the step we can take. And until the international community is satisfied with the Chinese law on organ transplant is effectively implemented, like foreign funding agencies, medical organizations and individual health professionals should not participate in any government China response meetings, organ transplant researches, and foreign companies that currently provide goods and service for China organ transplant program should stop if they know their service and goods are involved in the organ transplantation, which are coming from executed prisoners and living prisoners. And foreign government should not issue visas to doctors, to trainees, to medical professionals who are involved in the organ or bodily tissue transplantations involving executed prisoners. I think that's the step we can take.
Do you have evidence that that U.S. or Western companies are doing clinical trials in China with on either using living prisoners doing clinical trials or using organs from executed prisoners?
In fact, there was at least one company I know of. However, I do not record the name of the company. If I do, probably I should give you in a private manner. And because of our effort to expose the truth at different meetings, international meetings, such as World Transplant meetings, that company has stopped, withdrew their studies using the compound chemicals to test on efficacy of their organ donations, organ transplant. And whether, in addition to this company, whether there are more companies involved, I don't have an answer to that, and I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chung, thank you again for being here. This committee has done a series of hearings that Chris Smith has convened on all kinds of human rights abuses. And talk to us, if you would, about if you believe the campaign by your family, by organizations in Taiwan and outside of Taiwan, and just international human rights organizations, if those efforts, you think, moderated the treatment you received, that the treatment was less harsh as a result of those efforts, were they or not? And do you think those efforts play a role in being freed as you were after far too long in confinement?
Sure, I believe that I can safely come back to Taiwan is because those people supporting me. Many Taiwanese people in public supporting me, and everybody knows my case, and that's the main reason that I can safely go back to Taiwan.
Is there, I mean, the other side of that is that Chinese authorities who, I mean, nobody likes being preached to or told what to do by people, by outsiders. Nobody does. We don't like it when other countries criticize our behavior, and they don't, the Chinese government doesn't like it when we do that, understandably to a point. Is there some chance that authorities dig in when we are critical of their practices and we speak out, this committee or individual elected officials or human rights advocates like Ms. Cook speak out for you against the kinds of practices aimed at you, that it causes the Chinese officials to dig in more and resist and make the treatment worse in some cases?
I think they do everything to hide their ugly things. They are afraid what they done, those ugly things be exposed. So we have to let everybody know what they have done, those ugly things.
Okay. What lessons from your experience should you tell this country? Should you tell people in this country that pay attention to Chinese-American relations and Taiwan-American relations and Taiwan-Chinese relations? So what lessons would you take from your experience?
Yes, the most important thing is to let everybody know what they have done. They hide everything. They control the media. They control their internet accessing from their citizens. They hide everything. They control any media they can do. So the most important thing is to let the thing that they systematically hide to expose. That's what I think the most important thing that we can do to stop the prosecuting or anything.
Do you think your family members in China face persecution for your speaking out today, or face persecution for your speaking out on human rights for the last several weeks?
Yes, including my family in Taiwan. We are potentially in some kind of not safe condition. But in my case, I think everybody is watching. So I think basically we are safe. Just because everybody is watching.
Okay. Mr. Hu, would you, you were one of many, the history, I thought Ms. Cook's history was very good, that sort of the documentation of how, Falun Gong was, I'm not sure you used the word celebrated, but close enough in the 80s and into the 90s, and then what happened in the late 90s. And so many military personnel were practitioners of Falun Gong, apparently. Mr. Hu, what did China's military, did most of the personnel in the Chinese military quit, who were practicing Falun Gong, did they cease to be practitioners? Did they stop practicing? And those that did and those that didn't, what happened to them?
invite the translator for me. 首先我更正一下，法轮功是1992年开始在中国大陆开始传出的。
First, if I can correct one of the time issues, Falun Gong started being from 1992 in mainland China.
Oh, 92, okay, thank you.
据我的经历，从1992年开始，有很多军方的军官，开始也和其他的民众一样，开始练习法轮功。
As far as I know, from 1992, a lot of military personnel, just like a lot of civilian people, started to practice Falun Gong.
1999年720中共开始迫害法轮功之后，开始的时候我们被禁止相互联系。
From 1999, the Communist Party started to persecute Falun Gong, and we learned about the 720 incident. From that incident, we were banned to connect with each other.
私下里，联系我知道我接触的有，不到能够接触上的不到10个军方的练习法轮功的人员，他们也一直在坚持。至今我还知道有2个人和我保持联系的军方的人员，他们一直在练习法轮功的。
So we could only communicate with each other in private. Through that kind of communication, I learned less than 10 military officials continued to practice Falun Gong. Up to now, I know that still 2 of them were continuing.
还有什么问题？
后果是什么？坚持练的后果是什么？不坚持练的后果又是什么？
坚持练的，像我一直坚持练的，就会被开除军队。
Well, you asked the question, what happens to these 2 types of people? For those who continue to practice like myself, we will be dismissed from the military.
如果还要坚持练，不放弃军职的话，那么就得接受他们的强制的转化。
For those who do not want to give up, but still want to remain in the military, they need to be receiving the forced transformation.
因为事实上，在中国共产党控制的中国，所有的军队、政府官员是被禁止练习法轮功的。
Actually, in fact, China, under the rule of the Communist Party, within that realm, all the military officials, government officials, and the public are banned from practicing Falun Gong.
就这些。
That's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Brown. Just a few final questions. Mr. Hu, what was your rank in the military? You talked in your testimony about how the soldiers respected you because you were an officer, but you were subjected to endless hours of brainwashing. What does that brainwashing look like? Do they try to say that, it is psychologically disordered to be a Falun Gong? I read the People's Daily frequently, and I am amazed how the propaganda is so intense, almost on a daily basis, at least on the American version of the People's Daily. And I'm wondering what that brainwashing looked like. Secondly, earlier in the year, I was visited by a number of high school students, the equivalent of high school from China. None of them spoke English. They were here on some visitors program. And we had about a 2-hour meeting, and I asked them very specific questions about Falun Gong. The prejudice and the bias against the Falun Gong, direct result of the propaganda and what's being taught in the schools, was mind-boggling. And I challenged every one of their views, and they had no answers other than that Falun Gong is wrong and horrible, and went on and on. And I'm wondering, since there are so many college students and some high schools, but college students here in the United States, what effort is the Falun Gong undertaking to educate them as they sit on U.S. campuses and European campuses about the big lie that they have been fed by Beijing with regards to the Falun Gong. You know, hate radio works, hate TV works. We saw it in Rwanda where it led to a genocide. So if you could speak to that. And Charles Lee, in his testimony, talks about how China is facing an unprecedented moral crisis, and it is going overboard in trying to destroy Christians, Buddhists, Uyghurs, Falun Gong. Is it because of the moral crisis? Is the dictatorship that fragile? And finally, are Falun Gong in any way singled out for even worse persecution under the one-child per couple policy as a means of eliminating Falun Gong children? I mean, Rabia Kadir testified some time ago that forced abortion is being used as a means of genocide, that systematically the Uyghurs are being eliminated at birth or immediately prior through these programs, and it's part of a planned elimination of the Uyghur people. That's not all to Dr. Hu, but if you, I mean, I did to Mr. Hu, but if you could about the brainwashing and
Okay.
other questions.
我洗脑的问题，我所经历的在军队和在监狱里，还是程度上有所差别。
The degree of the brainstorming that experienced in the military compared to in prison or different.
在军队里边，我在材料里说的士兵，相对的尊重，是因为我当时还是个军官，还是军人。
In my testimony, I mentioned that while I was detained in the military compound, the soldiers were respectful to me because I was still an officer with the military.
这种尊重是和其他的我们的法轮功练习者所受到的待遇相比，因为他们会面临着每天被打、被骂、被折磨的境地，但是他们没有这样对我。
Compared to the other Falun Gong practitioners, I did enjoy the certain level of respect, well, whereas for the other practitioner, they will be scolded, tortured every day. But I didn't have that while I was still in the military.
他们对我所做的，一方面是禁止我了解外边任何信息，甚至于我所居住的房间的窗户都被用棉被钉死。
What these soldiers did to me was that they would prohibit me from knowing what's going on from outside the world, and the window was blocked by some cotton quilt.
我每天只给我一张床睡觉的地方，我无论是上厕所，不是我重新回答，我每天24小时被4个人监控，他们一共派了2个班，24个人来监控我，每时每刻都有4个士兵在我的身边监控。
I was monitored for 24 hours a day, and they would have 2 shifts of people monitoring me. So I would have 4 people watching me at any given time.
即使睡觉的时候，他们也站在我的床边。
Even while I was asleep, they would be standing right by me.
每天早晨起床之后，他们会高声地放录像，关于污蔑法轮功的录像。
Each morning after I woke up, they would play a video with very high volumes. This video were defaming Falun Gong.
其他还有一些时间，会找到一些其他的，从其他的机构找一些人来对我进行洗脑，去跟我讲法轮功的这些他们所诽谤的一些内容。
For the rest of the time, they would find people from other agencies to brainstorm me. They would tell me bad things about Falun Gong.
我又想到一个问题，您问我说我在军队的军职，我当时呢是文职官员， 相当于少校级军官。
Well, you ask what ranking I held when I was with the military. I was mainly working on the administrative work in the office, and my rank is equals to a major level.
我现在在，不知道是不是问我在监狱里那些洗脑的情况？在监狱里的洗脑要严重得多。
I would say the level of brainstorming in prison was much more severe.
我们呢我当时被关进上海提篮桥监狱。
I was present in the Tilanjiao prison in Shanghai.
在那里，我们每一个法轮功练习者都和其他的2个刑事犯人关在一个仅有3平方米的小房间里。
In the cell, 2 of the Falun Gong practitioners were locked with one practitioner was locked with another 2 criminal prisoners in a 3 square meter cell.
其他2个刑事犯通常都是监狱里找到的，就是品行很差的，无恶不作的这种人，把他们和我们关在一起，然后如果我们不转化，他们也被关进房间里不让出来。
The 2 criminal prisoners were chosen to stay us were usually the most ferocious criminals, and they were asked to transform us. If their transformation was not successful, they would not be let out either.
所以他们如果说能够转化我们，他们会得到很长期的减刑。
Well, but if they could transform us, their sentence could be reduced.
这是他们惯用的一种办法。
This is a way that the authority has been using for a long time.
所以，像我一样，绝大多数的法轮功练习者被关进劳教所和监狱的时候，都会面临长期的打骂折磨。
So many Falun Gong practitioners, like myself, if they were put into detention centers or prisons, they would be faced with long time scolding and torture.
就在这种条件下，我在上海提篮桥监狱度过了2年的时间。
Under such circumstances, I spent 2 years at Tilanjiao prison in Shanghai.
在我后2个月离开监狱之前，
During the 2 months before I left the prison,
因为我没有被他们转化，所以他们加重了对我的迫害。
because I was not transformed by them, they actually increased their persecution on me.
每天不让我睡觉，
Each day, they forbid me from sleeping.
我一旦睡着，他们会很粗暴地给我推醒。
As soon as I fell asleep, they would woke me up with a very violent way.
在这种情况下，我不得已采取绝食的方式进行反抗。
In this situation, I had no way but choose to take a hunger strike.
当我绝食2天之后，已经处于昏迷的状态。
After 2 days that I was in a hunger strike, I was almost in a coma.
他们把我送到医院，在医院里并不是进行治疗，
In that situation, they sent me to a hospital, whereas I did not receive any medical treatment.
他们把我四肢撑开，紧紧地绑在床上，
They stretched out my limbs and bound it to a bed.
一边给我打一种使我头痛欲裂的药物，
At the same time, they were injecting some kind of substance which made a severe headache to me.
一边他们对我进行强制的灌食。
At the same time, they were also force feeding me.
在那1个多月的时间里，我一直是在那种情况下被绑在床上度过的。
I spent the entire month being bound to the bed,
大小便也在床上。
and I had to relieve myself in bed too.
这种情况确实，是对人来讲是很难坚持的。
This is a situation where human beings cannot really stand by.
最终我熬过了那段时间。
But finally, I did survive that period.
这是在上海提篮桥所经历的洗脑，就是用这种强制的洗脑。当然，期间还有通过电视放录像那种高声的喇叭。
This is what I have experienced at Shanghai Tilanqiao prison, and especially the brainstorming part, which also includes playing a very high volume video to me.
同时有一些强制的劳动。
At the same time, I was forced to carry out some labor activities.
我又想到一个问题，刚才您问到的，关于他们采取洗脑的方式。 我在军队的还是军官的时候，他们通常呢开始的时候是污蔑法轮功。
Going back to the brainstorming activities at the military, at first they were saying bad things about Falun Gong.
他们说法轮功如何如何的不好，用他们编造的一些谎言，举出来一些他们编造的例子来企图说服我。
They fabricated some stories and examples trying to persuade me.
当我反驳他们无话可说的时候，
When I argued back with them, they had nothing to say.
他们就给我看了当时政府做的调查的报告。
When they had nothing to say, they started to show me a report that the government did at that time.
在那份报告里，我看到有2个统计数字，第一个是，时间我忘记了，是说当时练法轮功的人数有8000万。
From that report, I saw two statistical data. The first data, I didn't remember the time precisely, but the data tells at that time there were over 80 million Falun Gong practitioners in China.
然后，当中国政府觉得人数太多，可能会造成一些负面的影响的时候，他们第2次调查结果是说有6000万人在习练法轮功。
After the second survey, when the Chinese government began to think there were too many people practicing and that would cause negative impact, and then they came out with a number which was 60 million practitioners.
这是我亲身经历的事情。
This is what I experienced in person.
通过我的亲身经历，我知道
From these personal experiences, I learned
中共对法轮功的迫害就是谎言加暴力。
the persecution that the Chinese Communist Party used against Falun Gong practitioners were lies and violence.
他在开始的时候，完全是在用谎言欺骗中国的民众和世界的人民。
In the beginning, they used lies to deceive the Chinese public and the people in the international community.
所以，普通的百姓对法轮功没有深入了解的时候，会被他们的谎言所蒙蔽。
As a result, general public would be deceived by all these lies when they were not really aware of the truth of Falun Gong.
对于我们非常了解法轮功的人，他们欺骗不了。
But they could not deceive people like us who know the truth of Falun Gong.
在这种情况，他们会用暴力强制进行转化。
To people like us, they would use violence to try to transform us.
所以，当我在军队拒绝转化的时候，他们把我赶出军队，然后随后我又被关进了监狱。
That's why when I was in the military, refused the transformation, they dismissed me and then later put me into prison.
但是对法轮功还不了解的多数民众来讲，他们的谎言起了很大的作用。
However, to those public who were not aware of the truth of Falun Gong, the lies did take effect.
所以您谈到的关于中国的学生的这种反应，在美国社会，被问到关于法轮功的问题，会有一些对法轮功，一些负面的言论的，基本上都是来自于中共的欺骗的宣传。
That's why when you were talking to the Chinese students who were visiting this country, they would give you some negative comment about Falun Gong. That's the result of this lying type of education.
我们在美国的法轮功的练习者，已经尽了全力去讲给无论是美国的还是中国的人，法轮功的真相。
For people like us who are practitioners now in the United States, we have tried our best to tell the people in China and in the world the truth of Falun Gong.
我也非常希望，美国政府、美国的国会能够给予我们更多的帮助，帮助我们解决在中国发生的这么严重的迫害信仰的、迫害人权的这种暴政。
So I sincerely hope that the U.S. government, U.S. Congress could provide us with more support in address the serious persecution on human rights.
That's all.
Thank you.
One last question, Ms. Cook. His comments about the college students coming here and their beliefs about Falun Gong, do you find in your extensive kind of travels and studies and observations with human rights, do you find in China that neighbors and colleagues at work or relatives of persecuted Falun Gong practitioners sometimes rise to the occasion, sometimes rise up, speak out, show support? What do you see in Chinese society sort of around the practitioners' social networks when they're persecuted?
I haven't had those conversations in China with people, but speaking with people who've come out, it's interesting because it seems that there's a change over time, because initially quite a few people, especially after the incident of the self-immolation, the supposed self-immolation in 2001, and some of the other propaganda, a lot of practitioners, a lot of people tell about their own family members would come to them and be afraid of them. Their brother was worried that they were going to, do something to them or to their children. And it's, to the credit of individuals like Mr. Hu and others, that as they speak to their family members and I guess their family and kind of convince them both about the lies told about Falun Gong, but increasingly a lot of Falun Gong literature touches on the lies and the propaganda of the Communist Party more broadly. That people, their family, they speak of their family members changing, and what you see happening is things like, in a lot of cases, they'll go and hire lawyers, so you have the human rights lawyers then going to defend Falun Gong practitioners despite the risks, in part because the family members of those Falun Gong practitioners who may not be practitioners themselves have gone to seek out the lawyers to get their help. And increasingly, you're seeing these cases of petitions that family members have started to get rally villagers who will then actually sign petitions calling for the release of a Falun Gong practitioner. But in other ways, I think a lot of it happens more quietly. So in conversations, even with people from some Chinese government think tanks in private, they'll admit that the campaign against Falun Gong was a mistake. It's just that they can't say that publicly because their own position and they may be at risk. So when you speak to people publicly, there are a lot of people who still have very negative views of Falun Gong. But you also see people who are aware of seeing things from on the inside of the system who start to change their views. I just wanted to make one more comment also with regards to the situation of the organ harvesting issue. And that is that part of it is that, there's a two-prong approach. One is to respond to what what is very clearly happening in the question of, where these organs are coming from, because clearly China does not have a voluntary organ donation system. And whether they're coming from executed prisoners, or increasingly the evidence that they're maybe coming from Falun Gong or also from Uyghurs, there's the element of what we can take with regards to transplant tourism. But like Ethan Gutman's research also showed that some of these organs originally in the Uyghur case were going to high-ranking Chinese officials. So you also have a market for these things within China. And part of the other prong of the approach would be to really seriously investigate and create some kind of mechanism, I would think, to really look into these questions about whether it's pharmaceutical companies, whether it's medical exchange programs, and mechanisms of accountability, not just with regards to the transplant tourism, but also with regards to the whole industry itself, because you could see a situation where besides the tourism, people within China, including possibly party officials, may be the recipients of these organs. So I just wanted to mention, in terms of looking into that investigative side, to follow up on some of the research that individuals like Ethan Gutman or others have done. But as you saw, there are still a lot of questions about how this is actually playing out and how it may be spreading to other groups. Because we've seen generally with the campaign against Falun Gong, tactics, entities like the 610 office start to be used to target other individuals, whether they're spiritual groups or ethnic minorities. And you have a lot of Uyghurs who have disappeared as well. So there's a real question of what the actual current scope is of these organ transplant abuses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your very detailed testimony, and it certainly helps our commission do a better job, and hopefully our government. Thank you so much. I'd like to now welcome our second panel, but as you go, Dr. Shua, you mentioned Dr. Wang, and I think it's worth noting very briefly from his testimony back in 1990, the year 2001, and I'll just quote it in pertinent part. He says, "Before the execution, I administered a shot of heparin to prevent blood clotting to the prisoner. A nearby policeman told him it was a tranquilizer to prevent unnecessary suffering during the execution. The criminal responded by giving thanks to the government. At the site, the execution commander gave the order to go, and the prisoner was shot to the ground. Earlier, either because of the execution was nervous and aimed poorly, or intentionally misfired to keep the organs intact. The prisoner had not yet died, but instead lay convulsing on the ground. We were ordered to take him to the ambulance anyway, where the urologist extracted his kidneys quickly and precisely. When they finished, the prisoner was still breathing, and his heart continued to beat. The execution commander asked if they might fire a second shot to finish him off, to which the county court staff replied, 'Save that shot. With both kidneys out, there's no way he can survive.' That is brutality beyond comprehension. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you to this panel. I'd like to now ask our second panel if they would proceed, beginning with a medical doctor by training. Dr. Charles Lee pursued his medical studies at Harvard Medical School in the mid-1990s. In 1999, when the Chinese Communist Party began persecuting Falun Gong, Charles decided to go into China to help. He was arrested unlawfully, sentenced to 3 years in prison. He returned to the United States in 2006, and I would say parenthetically, for my own, no one has done more and been more tenacious in defending Falun Gong than Charles Lee. So thank you for being here today. We will then hear from Professor James Tong, who is a scholar of comparative politics specializing in Chinese politics and political violence. He is currently director of the Center for East Asian Studies at the University of California at Los Angeles. And we will then hear from Kaylin Ford, an independent scholar and human rights consultant currently residing in Ottawa. She holds honors in world history from the University of Calgary and a master's degree in international security and Chinese politics from George Washington University. She has authored numerous publications, including academic papers and op-eds in publications like the Washington Post and the Christian Science Monitor. Most recently, she co-authored a manuscript on the current status of Falun Gong in China, which is now under review with a leading China journal. And then we will hear from Mr. Zia, Senior Director of the Policy and Research at the Human Rights Law Foundation. He's an expert on Chinese politics, the structure of functioning of the Chinese propaganda and judicial systems, and a range of extra-legal Communist Party entities involved in human rights abuses in China. Over the past decade, he has overseen research and investigations contributing to numerous analytical reports. He has presented his research and analysis at the European Parliament, United Nations Human Rights Commission, academic institutions, and in the United States and Southeast Asia. He has a rich and multifaceted Chinese cultural background, including worker, military personnel, university lecturer, and medical research here in the United States. Mr. Lee, Dr. Lee.
Thank you very much, Chairman Smith and Co-Chairman Brown, and all the distinguished members and the staff members of the CECC for giving me this opportunity to testify today. Falun Gong actually had members of from 70 to 100 million people practicing at the end of 1998, according to the government sources. And since the persecution started, the severity is tremendous, because according to the 2006 UN Special Rapporteur report, 2/3 of the torture cases in China were against Falun Gong practitioners, and the torture methods includes sexual assaults, beating, shocks with electric batons, and violent force feedings with feces and salt solutions. The cruelty of this persecution is unprecedented. We have heard this organ harvesting issues for a long time, and what is more is that, and you mentioned, Chairman Smith, that about the body exhibit. We have this investigative report from the International Organ to Investigate Persecution on Falun Gong, which confirms that those body exhibits, most of them from Falun Gong practitioners. So I can give this the report to you later on. Regarding to the
Without objection, I would like to make that, or at least a major part of that, part of our record.
Okay,
think it would be very
that's good. I will give that to you. We have heard the Nazis, they after they gas chamber those Jews, Jewish people, they use their hair as the pillow, stuffing on their skins for the lampshades and the scarves, and their bones were ground for the fertilizers. What the Communist Party has been doing to the Falun Gong practitioners is very much comparable, sometimes even more horrific, because they harvest organs when people are alive, and then use the body remains for the body exhibits. It's like maximize their profit. And for the death toll of the Falun Gong practitioners, there are 3 levels of evaluation. The first one is we have 27 reports of deaths which have been well documented and confirmed by Falun Gong practitioners inside China. But there are still a lot of people missing. The organ harvesting estimates by David Keegan and Amator says like 50,000 people, and 65,000 by Ethan Goodman. But the actual number could be much bigger than this, because the CCP has always been manipulating the numbers. When they feel like the numbers are not good for them, they can just scale that down. And another thing is that China is a big country. There are about 300 million transient population in China. This includes the migrant city workers from the countryside and tens of millions of appellants who constantly appeal to the governments for their injustices, and also millions of unyielding Falun Gong practitioners who have lost their jobs, schools, and families, and left their hometown to escape the persecution. In the past decades, many of them have disappeared and vaporized, and nobody can trace them down. And also in March of 2006, there is a retired military doctor revealed that there were 36 concentration camps in China. And the biggest one he claimed that is in Jilin. It's called 672S camp, which held 120,000 Falun Gong practitioners. And on the other side, there are tens of millions of Falun Gong practitioners who had recovered from their illnesses, including terminal diseases, and benefit from the improved health. The persecution on on Falun Gong in the past 13 years has forced many of them giving up the practice, and in consequence, facing with deteriorated health and eventually died. My mother actually was one of them. So the total deaths caused by the persecution should have reached several millions. If all types of deaths are included, what outlined here is only part of the clues on these heinous crimes in humanity. It is extremely important for governments and people, both in the West and the East, to know and find out the scale and the severity of largely undisclosed persecution. Much more efforts are needed to stop this crime against humanity and to fully investigate and lay down the framework for the long overdue justice to be served. And I would say that the persecution of Falun Gong is comparable to Nazis' Holocaust and the genocide. So it's a very big issue, and really need much more efforts. And on the other side, Falun Gong practitioners have been peacefully resistant in the persecution. In the last 13 years, even though they have so many people tortured to death, there is no single case at which that Falun Gong practitioners use violence against the perpetrators. And practitioners have been trying their best to reveal the truth in China, and also people in practitioners outside China has developed media outlets and also those firewall circumstance software to help people in China. Myself actually is one of those people who I went to China trying to bring the true information to Chinese people, and was detained and later arrested in 2003. And when I was unlawfully imprisoned, they also tried everything possible to brainwash me and intimidate me. In addition to the physical torture and the forced slave labor. The brainwashing sessions lasted for all 3 years. They forced me to watch TV programs defaming Falun Gong and praising the Communist Party. Very often they cut off all my information sources for weeks on end and not even letting me talk with anybody. After these periods of isolation, they would subject me to intensive brainwashing sessions in the hope that my resistance would be reduced. If I weren't an American citizen whose case was internationally known, the treatment I experienced would have been much worse. I thank very much this strong support from friends around the world, especially the US Congress, that allowed me to come back to this country with my body intact and my will unbroken. Another thing I want to emphasize is that the awakening of Chinese people during these decades, while I was in prison, I wondered to myself how it was that people could so readily abuse that torture their own compatriots, and I wondered to myself how they allowed themselves to be deceived and how they came to be so full of hatred. Then in the end of 2004, the book titled 9 Commentaries on the Communist Party, published and by the Epoch Times, this book has given the answer to these questions and truly lead a historical awakening of Chinese people. In the past 60 plus years, the party distorted the Chinese people's sense of right and wrong. It taught them to view each other as enemies and to struggle against each other. The party's ideology is so pervasive that people are even unaware of their inability to think independently. What is more, from a young age, Chinese people are taught that the party and the country are the same concept. So whenever someone criticizes the party, they feel that it's an attack on the nation of China and on themselves as Chinese. What's happening in the last 8 years is that more and more people are quitting the Communist Party membership and other organizations affiliated to Communist Party. There are many people who stood out, using their real name, like Attorney Gao Zisheng. He quit the Communist Party in 2005 and announced that it is his happiest day because he denounced the Communist Party. He was no longer part of the Communist Party. These people, they are making the choice to live according to their own conscience. It's really an awakening of the conscience and not according to the will of the party. And they are refusing to participate in further violations against human rights. The process of renouncing the party, known as in Chinese as 退党, is thus a deeply spiritual, personal, and moral process as a matter of reconnecting with traditional Chinese values of human-heartedness and compassion. To date, there are 129 million people in China renouncing this quitting the party. Taking this important step. As more people's conscience are freed from the CCP's control, the broader social and political environment is changing. The CCP is losing the battle for the hearts and minds of the Chinese people, and this is a process that will ultimately lead to the CCP's disintegration. Today, Chinese people are becoming afraid of suppression and crackdowns by the CCP regime, and more people are taking a public stand to support Falun Gong and oppose the persecution. I would like to conclude my testimony by thanking the leadership of Congressman Smith and the Congress angels, along with another 160 members of Congress from 33 states for their bipartisan dear colleague letter to Secretary Clinton, expressing the serious concerns over China's forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience, and asking the Department of State to release all information about unethical organ harvesting in China, including what Wang Lijun might have shared with U.S. diplomats while seeking his asylum at the U.S. Consulate General in Chengdu. To my knowledge, the Department of State has not yet responded to the dear colleague letter yet. And we believe that the United States, as the world leader in protecting the human rights, has a moral obligation to speak out and help bring the end to this horrific crime against humanity. And we also believe that by doing this, the U.S. will protect itself from being further deceived and harmed by the CCP regime. I did submit a report on the critical CCP movement, so maybe you can take that as a record. Thank you very much.
Dr. Lee, thank you very much for your testimony and for your leadership. Professor Tang.
Chairman Smith, thanks for organizing this. I personally learned from this hearing, from the other witnesses. I've done research on Falun Gong. Of course, I've read many accounts of persecution of Falun Gong. I have even read some of the publications of other witnesses, but it is not as moving as hearing them saying firsthand and also in person. So let me begin with what Mr. Hu earlier alluded, which is the Falun Gong was founded in 1992, which means that this year is the 20th anniversary of the Falun Gong. So the Falun Gong, as well as Mr. Li Hongzhi, was inundated with many greetings from China. In all, there are 2,788 greeting cards from all over China, from the 6 different administrative regions in China, as well as 23 occupational groups, including teachers, military, law enforcement, and steel workers, etc. What this suggests is, one, that there's an extensive network of Falun Gong survivors. They have survived the 1999 crackdown. And number two, they have been in regular and frequent communication with the global Falun Gong community. And third, that the Chinese regime is either less willing or less able to persecute them. And there are some interesting developments. One is that the equivalent of the Attorney General in China, and that is the Chief Procurator, every year he has to deliver an annual report to the National Legislature in China. In this annual report, he has to list what are the major law enforcement problems facing China in the previous year. So from 1999 through 2002, the Falun Gong has been listed as a major law enforcement problem in China, but from 2004 onward, it was not listed as a major law enforcement problem. So that's on the national level. China has 31 provinces. In each of these provinces, each of the provincial procurators also have to make an annual report to the provincial legislature. So in 1999, 29 out of the 31 provincial procurators also list the Falun Gong as a major problem in their province. in 2000, 28 of the 31. But through the 2004 onward, then the number has become single digits. And in the last 3 years, 2009, 2010, 2011, there's not a single province which lists the Falun Gong as a major law enforcement in the province. And there are other developments as well. So one of the earlier witnesses mentioned the 610 office. So the 610 office was a June 10th office. It was created in June 10th of 1999 with the exclusive function to manage the Falun Gong problem. But starting 2002, it changed its name to become the leading committee on maintaining social stability, and also with the function diluted. So the function is no longer exclusively on the Falun Gong, but they have to deal with other law enforcement issues like peasants protesting because their land has been, because they've been evicted from the land, and also workers who have been fired because their factories were closed, and also citizens are protesting for high prices, right? So, and the government also have, you can also see in other developments that suggest that Falun Gong is no longer perceived as a serious political threat, because if it is an important policy matter, then the Politburo would convene a meeting, the Central Committee would issue an important document, and the entire national media would be launched to embark on a campaign, right? So the Xinhua, the official news agency, would have a special commentary. The People's Daily would have editorial, and then the China Central Television would have a special program on the case. And in all these cases, it was done in 1999. But in the past decade, none of these things has happened. So now, on the local level, there is also, unlike what happened in 1999, there were no roadblocks to block Falun Gong practitioners from going to Beijing or to provincial capitals. There's no systematic checking of the hotels and also rental properties for registered Falun Gong members, right? Now, this is not to suggest that the Falun Gong has been decriminalized, nor does it suggest that this is the end of persecution in China. For sure, as Mr. Hu earlier suggested, if you are a member of the People's Liberation Army, or if you work for the government, or you work for the party, you will be expelled from the military, from the government, from the party, right? So if you unfurl a banner of the Falun Gong in public, if you participate in collective meditation in a public park, if you print or distribute a Falun Gong publication, you will also be arrested. So if you have been a registered Falun Gong member, then you are under a surveillance network, which is either in your residence or in your workplace, right? So all those things would still be true. But it is also the case that just like in the US, there is 5 levels of perceived risk of terrorism, right? So there is the severe, there is a high, there is the elevated, there's a guarded, there's a low. Right now, we are in elevated mode as far as the Department of Homeland Security is concerned, right? So if you look at the Falun Gong problem for China, certainly it is the case. It was a severe in 1999, and from about 2000 to about 2003, it was high. But right now, it is probably in the low and guarded. On special occasions, like, say, May 13, which is a foundation day of the Falun Gong, or July 20th, which is the annual crackdown of the Falun Gong, then it would be elevated. And then on special events like the 2008 Olympics, then it would be high, right? So in my prepared statements, I have dealt with other issues, and I refer to interested parties to look at my prepared statement. Thank you.
Ms. Ford.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank the Congressional Executive Commission on China for convening this very important hearing today. I'd like to begin my testimony with a story about one man whose experience I believe is representative of Falun Gong practitioners in China. This is the story of Qin Yueming. He's a father and businessman from Yichun City in the northeastern province of Heilongjiang. Qin learned about Falun Gong in the spring of 1997. He was visiting a friend's home. The friend told him about the practice. They practiced a 1-hour meditation that evening, and he borrowed a copy of Falun Gong's central text, Zhuan Falun. Soon, Qin's family and friends noticed that his temperament changed for the better. He was no longer irritable. He gave up drinking, stopped quarreling with his wife. Neighbors recalled that he took it upon himself to repair the potholes on Lixian Street where he lived. Witnessing these changes, Qin's wife also began practicing Falun Gong, as did the couple's 2 daughters and several of their neighbors. In October of 1999, 3 months after the persecution of Falun Gong was launched, Qin traveled to a local petitioning office to appeal against the persecution. He was sent immediately to the Yichun City forced labor camp for 2 years. Not long after his release in April 2002, security agents broke into his home, took him, his wife, and their 15-year-old daughter into custody. In a Kafkaesque trial, Qin was sentenced to 10 years at the Jiamusa prison. At Jiamusa, he endured regular torture and humiliation as guards sought to coerce him into renouncing his spiritual faith. In the spring of 2010, the Communist Party's Central 610 office initiated a new 3-year campaign to intensify the ideological re-education of Falun Gong adherents across the country. Party websites in every province of China carried details of the campaign, which set quotas for each region, specifying the percentage of adherents who were to be transformed, a process, as you've already heard, of coercive and often violent indoctrination that ends when the victim renounces Falun Gong. On February 1st, 2011, the Jiamusa prison where Qin Yueming was held formed a new strict transformation ward in compliance with the 610 office directives. At least 9 Falun Gong practitioners were transferred to the ward. Within 2 weeks, 3 of them were dead. Qin was the first victim. Less than 5 days after the establishment of the strict transformation ward, his wife received a phone call from the prison informing her that her husband had died, ostensibly of a heart attack. He was 47 years old. When she arrived at the prison, she found his entire back covered in deep purple bruises with dried blood around his nose and mouth. Other inmates and a sympathetic guard relayed that he'd been violently force-fed the night before. They believed a feeding tube may have punctured his lung. The 2 other men who were killed was a 48-year-old Yu Yungang. He was abducted in 2009 and sentenced to 8 years in prison, and another 55-year-old Liu Chongjing died all within several days. Yet Qin's story did not end here. News of the deaths at Jiamusa were quickly relayed via an underground network of Falun Gong adherents and published on websites overseas. His oldest daughter initiated a petition to authorities demanding redress and accountability for his death. Soon the petition garnered over 15,000 signatures. I should mention as well that Qin's wife and his youngest daughter were sentenced to a forced labor camp because they were seeking a death certificate, and 7 other Falun Gong practitioners were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 11 to 14 years simply for visiting Qin's widow. This was actually 2 months ago. Similar petitions to the one that I've alluded to have sprung up in Heilongjiang, Tianjin, Hebei, Shandong, Liaoning, Henan, and other provinces, demanding justice for Falun Gong practitioners. They've been signed by thousands of ordinary citizens, including members of security forces. The petitions have not changed the will of Central Party authorities. Every year, they launch renewed efforts to eliminate Falun Gong and undermine public sympathy for the practice. In 2007, as the Congressional Executive Commission documented, Security Czar Zhou Yongkang, a Politburo Standing Committee member, ordered the nation's security forces to wage a strike-hard campaign against Falun Gong ahead of the 17th Party Congress and the Beijing Olympics. References to this crackdown were found in provincial jurisdictions of every province in China. In the first 6 months of 2008, there were at least 8,000 Falun Gong adherents who were abducted by security agents, typically from their homes. In 2009, the Central CCP leadership initiated the 6521 project aimed at intensifying surveillance and suppression of Tibetans, democracy activists, and Falun Gong practitioners. The campaign was rumored to have been led by Xi Jinping. Zhou Zhou Yongkang led his own top-level CCP committee, which exhorted security agencies to, quote, closely watch out for and strike hard against Falun Gong. Top officials have consistently launched such campaigns, the recent 3-year transformation campaign being but one iteration. Now, interestingly, as Dr. Tong mentioned, anti-Falun Gong propaganda has been largely absent at the national level since around the time of the 16th Party Congress in 2002. The campaign's continued prominence in national media was attracting unwanted international attention to the suppression, and a new generation of leaders may have decided that a better PR strategy was to allow the issue to fade away. But while the high-profile national propaganda campaign petered out, propaganda activities against Falun Gong at the local level have continued unabated. Earlier this year, for example, the Central 610 office launched a comprehensive campaign to clean up Falun Gong informational literature. The initiative mobilized neighborhood committees to tear down Falun Gong messages that were plastered on billboards, light posts, and telephone poles. In Weifang City, authorities were required to conduct twice-daily patrols looking for Falun Gong pamphlets. In Qingdao, they demanded 24-hour vigilance against Falun Gong's posters. The notices also require neighborhood committees to hold study sessions to unify their thinking in the anti-Falun Gong work. They mobilized local party functionaries to screen anti-Falun Gong films and go door to door, collecting promises from families that they would not support Falun Gong. A party document uncovered in several geographically disparate locales earlier this year exhorts authorities to create a climate in which Falun Gong are, quote, like rats running across the street that everyone shouts out to smash. Don't leave them any space. A party document from the Laodian Tianship in Yunnan province, dated May 15, 2010, notes that Falun Gong adherents in custody, however, were becoming more and more difficult to transform, that practitioners were returning to the practice with greater frequency, and new people were taking up the practice. It further notes that Falun Gong is, quote, fighting with us to win the masses, and the struggle to win people's hearts is still very intense. Party documents published this year repeatedly admonish cadres to, quote, overcome their paralysis of thought and truly understand that the anti-Falun Gong struggle has always been a long-term, important political task to grasp unremittingly. The continued suppression campaign launched against Falun Gong evinced two things. First, to senior leaders of the Communist Party, the eradication effort remains of great importance and continues to command tremendous human and material resources. Recently released prisoners from China continue to report that in many detention facilities, Falun Gong practitioners comprise the majority population. In the Beijing women's labor camp, for instance, they're between 2/3 and 80% of the imprisoned population. They are singled out for abuse, and of course there are ongoing allegations that the organs of Falun Gong prisoners of conscience are sold for transplant. Yet the official Communist Party literature coming out in recent years also reveals that the 13-year-old campaign to defeat Falun Gong has failed, that local cadres are increasingly unwilling to pursue the campaign, despite orders from their superiors, that more and more people are returning to or taking up the practice, and that despite all of its efforts, the party is losing the battle for the hearts and minds of the Chinese people. Thank you.
Ms. Ford, thank you very much for your testimony and for your insights. Mr. Shah.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Smith and Co-Chairman Brown, for holding this hearing, and thank you for CECC. I would like to address how this persecution operates without a legal base. We have established the argument that the Chinese government never legally banned Falun Gong. This is based on the Chinese lawyers who defended Falun Gong practitioners, based on Chinese constitution and the Chinese laws. Since Falun Gong practitioners didn't break any law, the regime couldn't apply rule of law to deal with Falun Gong issue. It initiated a political campaign. Political campaign cannot coexist with rule of law. So the regime created a very sophisticated system with some special tactics, including set up a new chain of command outside the legal system. This is 610 office, using existing party systems such as the Political and Legal Affairs Committee, PLAC, using internal party documents to override the laws and the constitution. Use this method to persecute Falun Gong. So the regime created a system to systematically break the law to persecute Falun Gong. I have included detail in my written statement. That's the results. When the regime systematically to break its own laws, then nobody's safe. That's the current situation in China. And then I will talk about why Wang Lijun is so important. Wang Lijun fled to U.S. consulate in Chengdu and setting off one of the biggest political scandals in China in recent years. But most people didn't realize that Wang Lijun, the human rights abuse was can trace back way before he took the position in Chongqing. So I would like to mention in 2000, Wang Lijun set up directed a research facility in Jingzhou, Liaoning province, to study and refine the harvesting of organs from prisoners. In 2006, Wang Lijun received a Guanghua Innovation Special Contribution Award for his research on organ transplantation from donors who have been subjected to drug injection. So why it's so important? Because Wang Lijun's case was well documented and published by Chinese media before he fell. So that's the evidence already there. We know the following facts from Chinese media and the official report. First, Wang admitted that he did the organ removal operations. Two, from the published information, his experiment at least included developing a brand new protective fluid to preserve the organ that enabled the recipient's body to receive the organ. Three, during the award ceremony for his organ research, Wang explained that the so-called on-site research is the result of several thousand intensive on-site cases. By available data, the executions happened in Jingzhou from 2003 to 2006 would not exceed 100. So the numbers don't match. Wang Lijun doesn't have medical training without any medical background. He collaborated with top universities, both inside and outside China. He was just a middle-level city police chief. The only reason for the cooperation is that he could offer something the others couldn't, taking the organs from the live human beings. The last, execution is not under police chief's jurisdiction. So he is not supposed to get the executed prisoners. Then who were those thousands of prisoners who were under police chief's jurisdiction? This is where Falun Gong comes in. In November 2009, a world organization to investigate persecution of Falun Gong investigator interviewed a former member of the armed police. The armed policeman witnessed a female Falun Gong practitioner's organ being removed when she was alive. At the end of the interview, the officer mentions that he had taken orders from Wang Lijun, who had said to eradicate them all, referring to Falun Gong practitioners. Taking the entire interview into account, investigators concluded that although the organ harvesting incident the police officer witnessed had occurred in Shenyang, the victims was likely from Tieling, where Wang was police chief, and that her detention and the prior torture had occurred there. And finally, the new leadership. There are several reasons to believe that the policy of persecution of Falun Gong will not have big change in the near future under the new leadership. The new leadership will face big challenge on Falun Gong issues. A Hong Kong Trend magazine published an article in October listing 3 major challenges the new leadership would face. One of them was how to handle the anti-Falun Gong campaign. But why it cannot change? Because one reason is the CCP lack self-correction mechanisms. And the CCP has never fully redressed the political campaign targeted at ordinary Chinese people, never. Cultural Revolution is only one exception, but Cultural Revolution targeted at the Chinese Communist Party itself and high-rank party officials. And some newly selected members or standing committee members of political bureau are also involved in the persecution. Before and after the 18th Party's Congress, the persecution of Falun Gong has become more severe, along with harassment to other religious groups. And finally, the social, political, and economic crisis the CCP facing will get worse. Thus, the human rights abuse will get worse. Thank you.
Mr. Shah, thank you very much for your testimony. Let me begin. Professor Tang, your information and what you've conveyed to the commission, I think, is very, very interesting, particularly Table 2, where you talk about how on the national level, the enforcement problem from the various counties shows that it probably peaked in 2001, maybe 2003, but then it began to abate. Now, my question is, so no one draws the wrong conclusion that somehow there's been an easing. Is it that, and the others might want to speak to this as well, and Ms. Ford, you spoke about that, and so did Mr. Shah, that rather than, there seems to be a morphing of how they do it rather than, and a change of direction rather than a lack of persecution or an abatement of the maltreatment of Falun Gong practitioners. Is that true? Because, or is there a mixed bag? I mean, I've heard that local cadres are unwilling, yet the labor camps are filled to overflowing with Falun Gong practitioners. The climate, like rats running across the street, squash them, and that the local level, continues unabated in terms of how it's implemented. What is the accurate picture in terms of the level of persecution? Has it changed, or has it abated? And are new people, are the numbers growing of Falun Gong practitioners? In light of this gross disinformation campaign, this hate campaign that's being leveled by the government at all levels, are people moving away from the Falun Gong?
I would rely on the other, more knowledgeable Falun Gong practitioners to comment on, say, what are the number of the Falun Gong practitioners inside China has been growing or about the same. Right? So it is that compared with, say, now 1999, when we have more or less reliable numbers. The lowest range is 2.3 million, and the highest number, as Mr. Hu mentioned, is 80 million, right? The 2.3 million, I believe, is every one of these 2.3 million members has a name, has an address. So these are actually people with faces. But after 1999, because Falun Gong has gone underground, then it would be difficult to know whether the numbers have been growing or not. And the same problem is would be difficult to know at the local level whether the persecution has been intensifying, has been abating or not. China has 3,000 counties, right, over 700 cities. So it's difficult to know what happens on the local level. Plus, it is also the Chinese policy that the management of Falun Gong, as well as with religious communities, is done on the local level. It's local management. So there is really no uniform national policy. So that makes the picture all the more confusing.
But is there a national strategy, but it's being implemented at a local level in a way that is more efficacious for the outcome? I mean, I think, Mr. Shah, you kind of talked about or spoke about the extra legal chain of command. That,
Yeah.
if
I would like to.
Yeah, please.
I'd like to answer this question. First, this is a political campaign of the party. The 610 office belongs to the party, not the state. So it's not required to report to the People's Congress. It's an option, but it's not required. This is the first. Second, the 610 office continue to exist independently from the Maintaining Stability Office. People mix them together because first, the Maintaining Stability Office was established on the experience of persecution of Falun Gong. So at the beginning, the office members are overlapping, especially when the director of both office all are the same person, Liu Jing. And when Liu Jing retired, the office separated again. You can see it's totally different office. Now the the leader of the 610 office, Central 610 office, is Li Dongsheng, and the leader of the Maintenance Stability Office is the Vice Minister of the Public Security. So it's a totally different person. So we cannot mix together, but they have the same strategy because the maintenance stability learned experience from the 610 office. And so this is a nationwide political campaign. Since there's never been any National People's Congress authorized the persecution, we cannot say the persecution never happened. Because it's never been a state action. It's a party action, but use the state organ as the instrument. That's my observation.
I want to just mention that because before the persecution started in 1998, the Communist Party's Sports Commission did an investigation on Falun Gong practitioners. They estimated there were 70 to 100 million people practicing Falun Gong at that time. And the National Congress head, his name is Qiao Shi, he also was involved in the investigation. His conclusion was that Falun Gong has nothing bad, but all goodness to the society. And many other officials from high level CCP, they all supported Falun Gong. And the number was mentioned and published in the publications before the persecution. And when the persecution started, the communist regime changed the number to 2.3 million. The reason was that they want to scale down the numbers of Falun Gong practitioners, because if they say there are so many people, like 100 million people practicing, then the target is too big, and it's the very bad image. So that is the tactics of the CCP when they do these political movements. They always twist around the numbers. And another thing. Professor Tong mentioned that after 2002, there was almost no, Falun Gong, on the media in China. This is also a strategy because in the first 2 years of the persecution, it's caused a lot of international attention. People saw that clearly that's human rights violations. Everybody was questioning what's going on in China. So they decided to go underground, but the persecution never stopped, never reduced or abated. My personal case is exactly the case like they want to cover up the persecution of Falun Gong. When they arrest me, they say they try to brainwash me, trying to transform me, give up the Falun Gong. After they failed, they changed the tactics. They say we're not going to talk about the Falun Gong anymore because your case is not a religious persecution. Your case is a criminal case. So that's what happened. They did not allow me to talk about anything about Falun Gong at the court, and they did not allow me to show the evidence, what the reason we want to reveal the truth. So that is exactly what the Communist Party want people to believe in, that Falun Gong is no longer a major problem in China, and they do not publicize the persecution, but underground, the persecution never abated. But on the other side, because the resistance by the Falun Gong practitioners, a lot of people, including those policemen, they found their conscience. Many of them even help Falun Gong practitioners in the police, in the station, that kind of places. So that's like both sides of the story. So I just want to mention this is the tactic of the regime. Thank you.
I'd be happy to address the question that you'd asked about numbers. Obviously, it's a very opaque climate, and it's very difficult to get a sound assessment. In 2009, there was a human rights lawyer in Beijing who told The Telegraph that he believed there were tens of millions of Falun Gong practitioners, and perhaps more significantly, that the number was growing. And this is consistent. You find references to this both within Falun Gong literature and within party literature. They refer to newly discovered or new practitioners quite frequently, actually with increased frequency. There was a study done by the Falun Gong sort of primary overseas website in 2009 that produced an estimate of about 40 million people who continued practicing, but not only practicing, but who had some level of contact with the wider community. This calculation was based on the number of underground Falun Gong material sites in China. These are sort of like a samizdat-like network that practitioners have established where they upload and download information about Falun Gong to the international, to the website. And there were 200,000 of these material sites, and they estimated that each one was connected to dozens or hundreds of Falun Gong practitioners. There's some evidence that comes from local level documents. You'll find, a particular township or district sometimes referring to the fact that they've got, 1,600 Falun Gong practitioners that they're monitoring. It's very difficult to piece together a coherent picture, but I think it's safe to say that the number is still, I would say, still probably in the millions. As far as your question about sort of the willingness of authorities at local levels to implement the persecution, my answer to James' Tong's question is this a matter of the party's willingness or their ability to fully sort of disintegrate Falun Gong? And I would say that at the central level, the party is completely willing. They refer to this in official documents from the 610 office at the central level. They describe this as a matter of life and death for the party, as a test of the party's ability to govern in these sort of very hyperbolic terms. But as Dr. Lee was mentioning, at the local level, now this isn't to say that there aren't a good number of very sadistic police officers and so on, but at the local level, we find increasingly that even members of the security forces are sympathizing with Falun Gong. You'll hear stories about 610 officers who will visit Falun Gong practitioners. They'll tell them, I'm going to have to arrest you in a couple days because my superiors are watching, but don't worry, we'll let you out really fast and then we'll try to protect you. So this is some of the dynamic, and of course it varies from locale to locale, but increasingly we are finding that at the grassroots level, as evidenced as well by these petitions, that people are increasingly sick of this, and that even the cadres who are charged with performing this transformation work, authorities are having a more and more difficult time convincing them of the necessity of the persecution of Falun Gong.
Let me ask you, in his testimony, Dr. Xu had a final concluding set of paragraphs, what can we do, and had a number of admonitions to the medical community and to society and to the U.S. government. One of them is the petition that they've launched, Dr. Kaplan, Dr. Centurion, and Dr. Xu. They've gained over 10,000 signatures within 2 weeks to the White House, asking that President Obama speak out against this horrific practice, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that approach. Secondly, he also asked that Congress adopt legislative changes to prohibit patients from going abroad to receive illegal organ transplants, and then suggests a registry that would include the source of the organ donation. Your thoughts on that? And finally, in 2000, I authored a law that empowered the U.S. government to deny visas to anyone who is involved with forced abortion or forced sterilization. Sadly, both the previous administration and the current administration has so inadequately enforced it that only some 27 people have been denied entry into the U.S., despite the fact that forced abortion is absolutely prevalent and is commonplace, I should say, throughout China. So it's been very ineffectively implemented. The other side of, or a contrary positive, in 2004, I authored the Belarus Democracy Act, which also has a visa ban in it, and some 200, I should say, top people associated with the Lukashenko regime, the last dictatorship in Europe, are denied entry into the United States. The Europeans have a similar annex that lists people who are denied and their families entry into Europe, and it has had a huge positive, and I think over time will have a very, very positive impact. I heard from some Belarusian leaders last week at a forum with Freedom House that there are judges who do not want to handle human rights cases because they don't want to be put on that list and be denied access to the United States. I just got news a moment ago that Jacob Ostreicher, a man that I've been working to get out of prison at the Palma Cerro prison in Bolivia, actually visited him in June and was down there just last week. He just got bail. But I introduced a bill called Jacob's Law that would say that anyone who is engaged in human rights abuse against an American will be denied a visa to the United States and their family, so they can't send their kids here to college. Hopefully it will have a chilling effect on barbaric practices by these individuals. there's a bill that's pending now, and I've introduced it, called H.R. 2121, and I appreciate your thoughts on it, that would say that anyone who engages in human rights abuse is is inadmissible to the United States. We've already had one hearing at the Judiciary Committee on H.R. 2121. Chai Ling, the great Tiananmen Square activist who now heads up All Girls Allowed, was one of those who testified, as did I. And it seems to me that a very focused sanction of this kind that says to individuals who engage in barbaric practices, well, at the very least, you're not allowed to come to the United States. Hopefully the Europeans and other countries will follow suit, will have potentially a chilling effect over time, but will also hold to account those who commit these. And it comports, I think, what Dr. Xu basically is talking about, holding the individuals to account who commit these crimes. Your thoughts on a visa denial policy and the other thoughts, questions that I asked earlier.
I think the State Department already have one question on the online application form. Do you ever, I don't remember exactly, ever involved in the forced organ removal operation? Already have one, but I think it should be well publicized and let everybody knows. And another thing I would like to think is about the dear colleague letter Representative Smith initiated and the petition. I think the U.S. government should respond to those letters and petitions because, as I mentioned, one case is important. Is this is the first and only case we know. It's published by Chinese authority, and all the evidence pointed to the one person. Before, it's all the collect the evidence, how many, all numbers. But now this is an individual. So this is very important. That's why the government should get involved because the individuals, the non-government organizations has limited resources. So government should get involved in the investigation. That's what I think. And another thing is, one short, there should be some kind of protection for whoever testify against themselves. Because if the doctor who operate did the organ harvesting and then he testified, then he's against himself. He lost a chance to practice either in China or in the United States. He's against himself, and because his action was violated the ethical code. So there should be some kind of protection to protect those who can step out to testify, because whoever testified practically lost everything, reputation, career, everything. Yeah, that's
Like Dr. Wang.
Yeah.
I have some suggestions. Like the first step is that the State Department should speak out. This is, we heard that in 2009, the Secretary of State says that human rights should not interfere with the trading, which is, which is totally wrong because human rights is for every human being. If we do not respect human rights, if we do not protect human rights, we cannot be called a human being. So the U.S. government should have this right stand. There should be no exceptions. If there's any human rights violations, the U.S. government should speak out. Let alone the severe heinous crime happening in China, as the scale I just talked about. It's comparable to the Nazis' Holocaust or genocide. And for the visa denials, the second step, we can do that in the legislative branch. And also what we can do is like the Boschilai case. We knew that their family has like $6 to $8 billion outside of China. We can trace this money down, maybe frozen these accounts. And also for this confirmed human rights, the perpetrators against humanity, they should be, arrested if they come out to U.S., United States or other countries. There should be this kind of law, explore, should be explore this direction later on. But I mean, the U.S. government should speak out, clearly to the CCP regime that there's no such thing could happen in this world. We cannot see it happening, and do the trading as normal. Thank you.
With respect to HR 2121, I think it has the potential to be very powerful. Falun Gong sources have already compiled massive lists enumerating the names, often the addresses, phone numbers, educational backgrounds of those who are particularly egregious in their use of torture and coercion and the persecution. So these lists already exist and are often fairly well corroborated. I think to give an example of why this kind of thing is powerful, just at the sort of the micro level within China, one of the things that Falun Gong practitioners have done very effectively to mitigate the worst excesses of persecution is precisely to sort of adopt a kind of name and shame tactic against the perpetrators. So if there's one police officer or prison guard who's particularly vile, they'll post information about them, about their crimes, their use of torture. They'll give it to the man's wife, to his kids. They'll put it on telephone poles, and that person will largely stop doing that. They'll also publish it overseas with their phone numbers, and the person will be inundated with phone calls explaining to them why they shouldn't be complicit in crimes against humanity. So even though that's just at the local level, the risk of people losing their reputation, their standing in the community because of these things, I think is very potent. And at the larger level, many Chinese officials at sort of the mid-levels and higher have assets abroad or have children that they've sent abroad or intend to hold foreign passports. So I think it could be a very strong deterrent. On the question that was raised in the previous panel as well about the impact of public pressure in individual cases, I think the Chinese government has sometimes been deliberately inconsistent in how they respond to such pressure, precisely so that Western policymakers can't figure out the most effective way to engage with them on human rights. So in some cases, attention on a particular case can exacerbate the abuses. But what I've found, and I think the Falun Gong victims on these panels would agree, is that on a whole, the pressure is beneficial. There's one case of Pudong Wei, who's an Amnesty International prisoner of conscience. He was detained twice at the same prison or same labor camp in Beijing. And the first time, there was no international attention attached to his case, and he was tortured very severely. The second time, he noticed that other prisoners were still being tortured severely. What he didn't know was that Amnesty had listed him as a prisoner of conscience. His wife was lobbying for him at the State Department, and that contributed directly to an improvement in his condition.
Diplomacy is always a two-way street. American citizens are paying a very high visa fee to go to China. It's because the U.S. government is requiring Chinese citizens coming to the U.S. to pay a high U.S. visa fee. So if we say the State Department wants to deny visa to certain categories of Chinese citizens, then it is quite likely that China would also reciprocate and deny visas to certain categories of American citizens. So it needs to be thought through. So that's my only comment.
But let me just say, the State Department celebrated the 1 millionth visa granted to an American citizen just a few months ago. But this chairman, me, I've been denied a visa, as have members of our staff, to travel to China because we've raised the case of Chen Guangzhen and wanted to visit him. So, it is a one-way street. And when you're talking about abusers, any collateral damage that might be done, if it has any mitigating effect on the abuse, is well worth it, in my opinion, and which is why I think we need to promulgate lists. Again, I heard it as recently as 2 weeks ago from Belarusian leaders that certain judges, and I want to get more information on this to see how widespread it is, simply will not take up human rights cases because they don't want to be on the list. And I think if we are serious about it and promulgate these lists and hold our own government to account and say, we don't want them coming here. When I was in La Paz, I raised with government officials of Evo Morales that Jacob's Law, which is a parallel to everything we're talking about here, would say that if you want to send your kids and you're an abuser, to University of Miami or some other school, forget about it. Because we're serious about abuse and all this other positives that you might glean from coming to the United States and going on a shopping spree, enjoying the benefits of Disney World, or sending your kids to Yale or Harvard or wherever you want to send them, is, from our point of view, is part of the price of trying to help victims, because this commission and everything we do on the Human Rights Committee and what we should be first and foremost all about, in my opinion, is victims, to try to mitigate and lessen the number of victims. And it seems a no-brainer that holding abusers to account, they should be before a court of law on their way to The Hague, or if it's an international issue, for crimes against humanity, rather than whether or not there might be some corresponding retaliation by the Chinese. Bring it on, I would say to the Chinese government. We need to be very serious about abuse. We have not been, and I think we have, as a government, and it goes through successive administrations, have been very weak and vacillating when it comes to human rights of the Chinese people. And that has to change. In May 26, 1994, Bill Clinton delinked most favored nation status from our trade policy. We have seen a deterioration. It was already bad, obviously, ever since. And I think while we may never get that back again, we do have other tools in the toolbox, and we need to use them. And so if any of you have any final comments, any statement you'd like to make before we conclude the hearing, please. Dr. Lee?
Yes.
You don't have to if you don't want to. But.
Yeah, I just want to thank you and all the other members of CECC for the hard working. And it's extremely important for us to really face the human rights violations in China, because China is such a big country. As I said, even the transient population in China is 300 million. It's like the entire United States population is moving around. They're moving from city to city looking for jobs, that kind of things. The impact is huge, so we have to really look into these things and do whatever is possible. And as I also said, that the people in China are awakening. So we do see hope, and we do know that we need to do a lot more things. And we hope that we can do this together and with the U.S. government. Thank you very much.
Professor?
I just want to commend Mr. Smith's principled position on human rights.
Thank you.
I'll just echo that. Thank you again for convening this hearing.
Thank you for holding this hearing. And another thing is there's a petition for the, it's outside. I think whoever attend this meeting and haven't signed, please do so when the hearing is finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.